Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, folks, and welcome back to another spine-tingling episode of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm your host, Steve Taylor, and tonight we've got a couple of yuletide nightmares guaranteed to make your holiday season just a bit darker. Forget the sugar plums. These stories are the stuff of twisted dreams and shadowed corners. So grab a blanket, maybe a mug of cocoa, extra marshmallows for comfort, and settle in for a festive fright. Tonight, we'll dive into two chilling tales. First, a story of survival and desperation that pushes the boundaries of human endurance and morality in Cassandra O'Sullivan Sachar's Hungry Christmas. Then, we'll whisk you away to Winter Hollow, a town that takes its Christmas spirit to terrifying new heights in Henry Hallmark's The Prince of Winter Hollow. Both tales will make you question whether the holidays are really all about cheer or something much darker lurking under the tinsel. Now, get your ticket ready, take your seat in our theater of the minds, and brace yourself. It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Our first story tonight follows two friends on a holiday road trip that takes a very wrong turn, leaving them stranded in a deadly storm. As the hours drag on, survival becomes a grim affair, and the line between hunger and horror begins to blur. Written by Cassandra O'Sullivan Sachar, performed by Geoff Sturtevant, and featuring Kevin Barbare and Nick Goroff, this is Hungry Christmas.
I told you we should have waited until after the storm,
Cole said, brow furrowed in consternation as he peered through the windshield. Even with the wipers on full speed, he couldn't keep his field of vision clear. The frost encroached as the minutes ticked by. From the shrinking porthole, the road stretched out before them, a narrowing black snake, the earlier dusting of snow transforming into a heavy white blanket, devouring the pavement. Henry shivered, though the heater was cranked on full blast, and his linebacker's build left him with plenty of padding, unlike the lean quarterback in the driver's seat. Always defending himself to his bossy and complaining roommate, teammate, and longtime friend, sometimes Henry felt tired.
I just wanted to see my mom, help her wrap the presents for my little bro.
Though the other guys in the dorm had headed home right after finals, Cole and Henry stayed a week later. A chance for the freshmen on the Blackthorn University football team to earn their stripes. It was fine, really. Henry liked having access to a nearby empty gym, and they'd helped set up a makeshift football camp for the local elementary school kids. But now it was nearly Christmas, and it had been brutal, balancing classes and football all semester. Henry needed the comforts of home and family. He yearned to gorge himself on homemade sugar cookies while watching Christmas movies in front of a fire. He could picture the tree with its multicolored lights and all the goofy ornaments from over the years. souvenirs from vacations, and simple art projects he and his brother made in elementary school. Christmas at Henry's house wasn't fancy compared to Cole's family, with the decorations looking like they came straight out of a Pottery Barn catalog. But he didn't want it any other way. Henry hadn't wanted to wait a single extra night to head home.
Damn! I think the wipers froze.
Cole exclaimed, bringing Henry back to the present. The clear space on the window shrunk even more, and Cole's attempt to spray the windshield fluid was in vain. The liquid must have frozen. Henry tried to help by turning up the defroster, but it was already on the highest setting.
Okay, we're the only car on the road. Just slow down and try to concentrate,
he said, his voice tranquil while his heart raced. What if they crashed? What if the car wouldn't go any further, and they froze to death?
I am concentrating. It's what I've been doing while you're just sitting there like a lard ass staring out the window.
Henry decided to give him a pass on his testiness. Cole was always ragging on Henry's weight. Had been ever since they were kids. Cole, the rich golden boy and straight-A student. Henry, the fat kid without a dad who barely scraped by. Football brought them together and kept them that way, even though they didn't have that much in common.
Okay, we're about to head up a slight hill,
Henry said, his voice soft as he attempted to exude a sense of calm over his teammate.
Nice and steady. I'll turn the hazards on just in case anyone comes up behind us.
Cole slapped his hand away.
Stop touching my car. I just need to focus.
But attention wasn't the issue. For all the elegance of Cole's Lexus, it couldn't climb even this minor incline. The wheels started spinning, unable to grip the asphalt beneath the snow and ice, and the car stopped, unable to trudge any further. Henry waited for Cole's tirade of profanity to stop.
Looks like we're stuck. Let's...
No shit, Sherlock. We just need some traction.
As Henry cracked his door, a gust of snow and ice crept into the car.
There's about 6 inches on the road by now. I don't think we'll be able to move.
More swearing and pushing the pedal to no avail. Finally understanding the hopelessness, Cole said,
Okay. Let's call AAA and get towed. We're what, like 50 miles away from home? My dad can come get us in his truck.
Henry nodded.
First, we got to get this car off the road so no one rams into us.
With daylight fading fast, the black car would soon become shrouded in darkness, nearly invisible to another hapless driver, with only the hazards providing a sign of their existence. Henry got out of the car, wishing for snow boots instead of his old Converses. Using his bulk to push the car from behind while Cole navigated the steering wheel, they eventually managed to reach the shoulder, or at least what they thought was the shoulder, since they couldn't see anything under the accumulating snow. Climbing back in, Henry blew on his hands. He relished the heat for just a moment.
Turn off the car,
he commanded.
We don't know how long we'll have to wait. And call your dad. And then we can figure out a tow truck.
Cole was already doing just that.
No!
He screamed, tossing his iPhone into the back seat.
No service? Are you kidding me? Try yours. Now.
No service?
The two most depressing words he could utter. They were, essentially, in the middle of nowhere. No nearby gas station or rest stop. No cell phone towers. No other cars.
I'm sure a plow will be by soon, and then we can clear out.
2 hours later, snow still falling. Darkness fully descended. They got their wish. Sort of. They'd found some protein bars in the glove compartment and eaten those, and Henry added a hoodie he'd found in his backpack to his layers. He'd offered it to Cole, but Cole said it was ugly and smelled. It was kind of hideous, some cheap thing from Walmart, but freshly laundered. Henry's gut panged from hunger as he imagined the hearty dinner waiting for him at home. maybe meatloaf or lasagna. Instead of listening to Cole's griping, he'd be laughing as his little brother told him about his latest pranks. But here he was, stuck in a car. Still no service, though they kept checking. Every 10 minutes or so, Cole turned on the car for a quick burst of heat, and then turned it off to conserve gas. Even if a plow didn't come by until morning, they'd be okay, as long as they warmed up every now and then. And then came the glorious rumble of an approaching vehicle. Except for Cole's belly aching and the haunting roar of wind around them, it had been entirely silent.
It's a snowplow. Hallelujah!
Cranky old Cole just about clapped his hands in glee.
We're set.
But his words were cut off as the snowplow, practically racing on the seemingly abandoned road, clipped the Lexus hard enough to push it off the shoulder and into the ditch. How many times did the car roll? How far did it fall? Henry didn't know. He had a seatbelt on when it happened, having refastened it after getting out of the car to pee earlier. His body was sore where the heavy cloth dug in, but he was otherwise unscathed.
Cole, you all right, man?
He asked, after the vehicle shuddered to a stop, and right side up at that. But Cole was not all right. Flung into the back seat, he lay at an unnatural angle, his neck crooked and eyes open.
Cole, buddy, you okay?
Silence. And then a loud wail erupted, filling the car. Henry realized he was the one making the sound. Hours later, and still no cell signal, not on his phone and not on Cole's. Henry knew not to turn on the car for warmth anymore, remembering from some Boy Scout meeting of long ago that the carbon monoxide would kill him if the car was blocked by snow, which it was. Not only did the plow ram the car off the road, but it pushed off a ton of snow too. And now all Henry could see from the window was white. But it was insulating, that deadly snow. And he was warm enough in his layers, he figured he'd survive the night. He could see his breath, but it wasn't too bad. Right, his breath. What about oxygen? Should he try to break a window and dig himself out? Was it better to risk suffocating in a car trapped with a corpse? Or should he risk exposure? Where would he go even if he could escape this cocoon? He'd freeze to death on the side of the road. He tried to sleep, wanting to mentally escape his prison. Henry pictured himself home, in bed, with the quilt his mother made wrapped around him. Wide awake and ice cold, Henry checked his phone. 6:03 a.m. Surely a rescue crew would be looking for them now. He imagined the relief on his mother's tear-stained face when she'd finally get to see him, to hug him. And he pictured Cole's parents, devastated when they learned the news about their own son. Guiltily, he looked at Cole, whose eyes remained open, but now cloudy. He remembered in second grade when Roxanne, the girl he liked, confided in him that Cole Summer had the most gorgeous eyes she'd ever seen. Not so pretty now. More time passed, and Henry didn't know how much, since his phone had died, and so had Cole's. He wished he wore a watch so he could know the time, but he wished lots of things. Here it was, Christmas Eve, and all he wanted from Santa was rescue. But no one came. From within the car, through the snow, he watched and waited as the sun came up and went down again. He had a water bottle in his bag, and he drank it. He drank Cole's too, and found another use for the empty bottle. Henry turned the car on, just for a moment, to roll down the window enough to check how deeply he was buried. As the snow started flooding the car, he pressed the button again to furiously roll it back up. He turned the car off in defeat. He'd wait for rescue. That was safest. They had to come for him soon. Henry wasn't a science guy. He didn't know the facts and couldn't even look anything up on his dead phone. The air felt okay. He seemed to have enough oxygen, but he was so hungry. Nearly 6.5 feet tall with a barrel chest and thick arms and legs, Henry was huge, and with an appetite nearly as enormous. He was a double whopper with cheese, large fries, and chocolate milkshake kind of a guy. He didn't know if he'd ever gone for more than about 12 hours without food, and a big meal at that. But all he'd had in the past day or so was a protein bar and some water. Henry remembered the last time he'd been home, nearly a month ago now, for Thanksgiving. He recalled biting into the tender, succulent turkey breast, savoring the sweet, tangy cranberry sauce, and inhaling the rich, gooey pumpkin pie. He was so ravenous he started feeling lightheaded. Henry ate some snow that had fallen in when he opened the window. It tasted like nothing and failed to quench his hunger. Morning again. Henry could tell from the lightened snow outside the windows. Christmas Day, and no rescue. He wanted to sleep and escape from the confines of this car with his deceased companion. He wanted to fill his belly with food instead of sadness and despair. Where the hell were his rescuers? By nightfall, he was almost delirious from hunger. And that's when he started to wonder, how long could he survive here, with no food and only snow for water? He remembered learning about the Donner Party, way back when in middle school. He remembered Cole saying they'd eat Henry first, since he was the fattest and could feed the rest of the class. And he remembered his pocket knife, the one on his keychain. He opened the blade, testing the sharpness with his finger. Henry reached into the back seat to Cole. Just act. Don't think. It had worked for him in football, and it would have to work here. He pulled the sleeve back from Cole's cold, dead arm, feeling for meat. Cole spent hours in the gym and had very little body fat, but Henry found a nice bit of flesh on the inner forearm, near the elbow. As Henry sliced into his friend's tissue, the thick, lazy blood oozed but did not gush. Cole's eyes, sightless, continued to stare, to accuse. Cole had said he'd eat him, hadn't he? Wouldn't Cole be doing this very thing if their roles were reversed? Henry pondered this as he bit into Cole's lifeless flesh. And despite his horror, despite his sorrow, he chewed and swallowed and cut again. Henry ate his Christmas dinner and thought about turkey. It was too late when the cops finally found the car, more than a week later, buried under the snow. At the urging of Henry's bereft mother, and going off the data from the last cell phone pings, they had continued to canvass the area. The dogs found them. Barking, they dragged their handlers to the ditch. The cops dug through the snow to finally reveal Cole's battered black Lexus. They were expecting 2 corpses, dead from injury or suffocation or hypothermia or dehydration, or some combination thereof. What they found were 1.5.
And that, dear listener, was Cassandra O'Sullivan Sachar's Hungry Christmas, performed by Geoff Sturtevant, featuring Kevin Barbare and Nick Goroff. Nothing like a little Christmas cannibalism to put things in perspective, eh? If you're anything like me, you might be reconsidering that holiday road trip you've been planning, or at least making sure you pack extra snacks. But don't get too comfortable just yet. We've got another tale waiting to unwrap its secrets. This next story takes us to a town where Christmas cheer hides something sinister. A place where festive furs and charming royalty come with more than meets the eye. Written by Henry Hallmark, performed by Mathew Farrugia, and featuring Olivia Steele, this is The Prince of Winter Hollow.
You'd think by now, with Christmas rolling around every damn year like clockwork, I'd be numb to it. But Winter Hollow? This town doesn't just do Christmas. It breeds it, multiplies it like rabbits hopped up on peppermint schnapps. We've got trees on every corner, every porch, in every store, and inside each damn window like they're squatters. The gas station has a tree by the windshield washer station. The library has 7, one for each genre section. The public restroom by the park? Guess what? Tree. Yeah, that's where I live. Anyway, this story kicks off around our annual Winter Hollow tree lighting ceremony. A way for the town to show off that, yes, we somehow found even more Christmas trees than last year. We take Christmas so seriously around here that even Santa would need counseling after New Year's. I'm Gabe, and if you ask me, this town has more holiday cheer than common sense. But hey, we gotta make our mark on the map somehow. Which brings us to the Prince. The guy showed up out of nowhere. Prince Stefan of Veldenmark. Because, of course, that's his name. He had that whole charm offensive thing going. A perfect smile, a European accent you couldn't quite place. And this way of tilting his head just enough to make people weak in the knees. I mean, come on. It's like this guy was genetically engineered to star in a Hallmark movie. The official story was that he was visiting not for business, but for pleasure. Yeah, right. A literal prince. Taking a vacation in Winter Hollow, of all places. You expect me to believe royalty wants to spend the holiday in a town that reeks of eggnog and despair? But, whatever. You know the drill. People around here ate it up like it was a mistletoe-laden rom-com come to life. Then there's Holly. Yeah, her name's really Holly. Go figure. She works at the bakery. And I swear to you, she's got a tragic backstory so stereotypical it should be copyrighted. Dead parent? Check. Secret artistic dreams? Check. Utterly oblivious to red flags? Double check. Naturally, Prince Stefan and Holly met at the Christmas tree lot. Because that's where all great romances are born. Surrounded by overpriced pines and the scent of hot cocoa. I was there too, helping out. And let me tell you, that's when things got weird. Holly had just picked out a 7-foot-tall blue spruce when disaster struck. One of the workers had stacked far too many trees against a flimsy wooden barrier. And as Holly strolled past, the whole display groaned under the weight, swaying ominously. I barely had time to shout, "Holly, move!" before the trees toppled like dominoes. And the biggest one, a 9-foot-tall beast of a pine, toppled over, heading straight for her. That's when Stefan stepped in. In one fluid motion, the prince caught the falling tree with a single hand, his arm rigid. The whole damn pine stopped mid-fall, suspended above Holly like it weighed nothing. At the same time, Stefan's other hand slid smoothly around Holly's waist, pulling her close and dipping her into a ballroom-style dance position. I nearly slow-clapped. There they were, Holly draped backward over Stefan's arm, her face mere inches from his, her eyes wide first with surprise, then adoration. He gazed down at her, a slow smile curling on his lips as if they were the only two people in the world. For a second, I swear the snow around them glistened. As if on command, Christmas music wafted gently through the evergreen-scented air, and I'll be honest, I have expected a choir of angels to descend. Stefan was no ordinary man. No. He was a walking Instagram filter.
You are safe now.
Stefan purred, his voice low and velvety. Holly blinked up at him and swooned. Her knees buckled, but Stefan held her steady, his hand firm at the small of her back. They stayed like that for a moment, just long enough to make the rest of us standing there feel like extras in someone else's love story. I scoffed, rolled my eyes, and muttered to myself, "Classic." After that, things happened fast. Stefan helped Holly stand upright, still holding her hand like a chivalrous knight in a storybook. She blushed, stammering thank yous while tucking her hair behind her ear like a love-struck teen. And Stefan? He didn't even break a sweat. He just displayed that perfect smile of his, the one that looked like it belonged on the cover of a romance novel.
You really saved me,
Holly whispered, still dazed.
It was nothing, my dear.
Stefan replied with a modest shrug, as if catching falling trees and dipping damsels were part of his daily routine. I stood there in disbelief, hands jammed in my jacket pockets, watching the whole thing unfold like a cynical audience member trapped in a holiday special I never asked to see. Winter Hollow may be out of its mind, but this was on an entirely different level. Holly and Stefan had bonded over Coco in a well-timed near-death experience. I mean, come on! It was too perfect! Suspiciously so, but no one else seemed to notice anything weird. Not yet, anyway. Unfortunately for me, that was just the start of it. Stefan and Holly were virtually inseparable after her brush with the afterlife, holding hands at the first of several annual tree lighting ceremonies, ice skating together, and sipping double mocha lattes at the winter market. It was like a picture-perfect romance unfolding in real time. The townsfolk were smitten, too. I mean, everyone in Winter Hollow couldn't stop talking about how wonderful it was to have a real prince in town and how blessed Holly was. I, on the other hand, was getting uneasy. Stefan was too perfect. And the trees. Don't get me started on the trees. Winter Hollow was already hopelessly addicted and probably needed an intervention. But it got worse. So much worse. Wherever Stefan went, trees seemed to follow. They kept showing up in weirder and weirder places. He'd take a place with Holly down Main Street, and the next thing you know, there's a sapling in the middle of the road. The two would get together for a date and admire someone's Christmas lights. And suddenly, there's a fully grown pine outside that family's kitchen window, blocking the view. When I made the mistake of pointing out that these trees weren't there before, my neighbors looked at me like I just offered them a glass of bleach. By the third day, things got even more bizarre. I started to notice icy runes carved into the trunks of some of the newer trees. Symbols so frigid that they gave me a chill, even through my gloves. When I ran my fingers over them, I pointed them out to Holly, but she just rolled her eyes and told me I needed to switch to decaf. When I went back later to get a closer look, the sigils were gone. It all built up to the night of the Winter Hollow Gala, the biggest of our town's 36 holiday events. This year, as is tradition, it was being held at the old inn on the edge of town. The one that, fun fact, used to be a morgue. Because everyone knows that a venue capable of holding dozens of bodies lying down can fit far more people standing up. It's a numbers game, folks. I'll give credit where credit is due. Stefan really pulled out all the stops. The place was decked out floor to ceiling with ornate, decorated Christmas trees. It looked like a forest had puked in there. I counted at least a dozen trees in the foyer alone. As I looked around, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This place has more trees than brain cells, I whispered to myself, trying to keep my growing unease in check. Every time I turned around, I swear there were more. People were laughing, drinking spiked eggnog, and twirling on the dance floor like extras in a holiday special. Amidst the crowd, Stefan and Holly twirled and swayed, glowing in the soft light of the chandeliers. But the longer I watched, the more I realized something was seriously wrong. The gala had that over-the-top Christmas magic everyone around here seemed to crave. Glittering lights, a band playing something festive with sleigh bells, and of course, more trees than a lumberjack's fever dream. As Stefan and Holly danced in the center of the room, they looked exactly like the embodiment of couple goals. Everyone was smiling, caught up in the fairy tale moment. Everyone, that is, except me. Something about Stefan was undeniably off. He glided across the floor effortlessly, like he was floating, and his eyes, normally bright and cheerful, seemed sharper tonight, almost too vivid. Every time he looked at Holly, his gaze lingered a second too long, like he was observing her with some strange, unspoken hunger. I was about to brush it off as my usual cynicism when something else caught my attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the trees in the room weren't stationary. They were moving. That's impossible, I told myself, thinking there must be some other explanation. And yet, as I watched, their branches seemed to sway ever so slightly, though there wasn't a single draft in the room. I took a step closer to one of them, squinting at the branches to ensure I wasn't seeing things. That's when I saw it. A faint shimmer around its trunk, like a ghostly frost. And if you looked just right, there was a face in the bark. It was faint, almost like a reflection, but unmistakably human. Had anyone else noticed this? I wondered. I glanced around, but everyone else was still laughing and drinking, oblivious to the fact that we were surrounded by whatever these things were. Meanwhile, Stefan leaned down and whispered something in Holly's ear, eliciting a giggle. He dipped her low, their faces so close they could have swapped gum without touching, and she looked at him with such dazed adoration I almost felt sorry for her. He lifted her back up, still holding her close, and as she looked away to blush, his gaze shifted to me. Our eyes met, and his face transformed. The light in his eyes dimmed, the lines of his face went rigid, and his mouth twisted into a grin that could chill an igloo. For a split second, the prince's mask slipped, and I saw the real Stefan. I froze in that instant. It was obvious. He knew that I knew. I forced myself to look away, pretending to just be another guest caught up in the Christmas cheer. But my mind was racing. Stefan wasn't just some charming foreign prince on vacation. He was dangerous. The rest of the evening was a blur. I kept my distance, watching Stefan and Holly from the edges of the crowd, doing my best to stay inconspicuous. I tried to approach a few people, pointing out the strange shimmer around the trees, but they either brushed me off or laughed. I felt like I was losing my mind. At one point, I stumbled into the hallway near the bathrooms, needing a break from the noise and the sight of those accursed trees. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm down, when I noticed something strange. At the far end of the hallway, a door I'd never seen was ajar. A faint blue glow seeped out from the crack. Curiosity got the better of me, so I made my way over and pushed the door open. Inside was a room lined with old, dust-covered mirrors. They stretched from floor to ceiling, surrounding a massive Christmas tree in the center of the room. But this tree was wrong. Its needles were a dark, sickly green, almost black, and icy blue runes glowed faintly along the branches. I stepped closer, drawn by some strange compulsion. And that's when I saw them. Faces. Not reflections, but actual faces, twisted and frozen, staring back at me from within the tree's branches. To my dismay, I recognized some of them. Steve, the mailman, Cora, who ran the gift shop. These were the faces of people I hadn't seen in days. My stomach twisted as realization dawned. The trees weren't just decorations. They were people. Somehow, Stefan had transformed them, trapping their souls inside these monstrous pines. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to find Stefan standing in the doorway, his face calm and unreadable.
Enjoying the gala?
He asked, his voice low and smooth. He took a step into the room, allowing the door to click shut behind him. What is this? I stammered, gesturing toward the grotesque tree. Stefan smiled, his gaze shifting to the tree.
Just a little Christmas magic,
he said, as if he were discussing a party trick.
It's a tradition in Veldenmark, capturing the spirit of the season. Quite literally.
He moved closer, the warmth draining from his smile.
You're a curious one, aren't you?
His voice had taken on a darker, sharper edge.
Most people wouldn't look twice. But you just had to dig, didn't you?
My mouth went dry. These are people! I managed, gesturing at the tree. You're turning people into trees? Stefan tilted his head like he was studying a particularly interesting insect.
Well, yes,
he said, unfazed.
That's how we ensure our royal festivities are, shall we say, unforgettable.
He returned his gaze to the tree, his expression softening in an almost affectionate way.
They'll live forever in this way. A perfect fixture of the celebration.
I took a step back, glancing toward the door, but Stefan blocked my path. You can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. People will notice. Someone will stop you. He chuckled, a sound that sent ice down my spine.
Oh, they won't notice. People are too busy with their seasonal festivities and their mundane, insignificant lives. They don't want to know the truth.
He leaned in, his gaze piercing.
And as for you, well, I think I have just the place for you in our little menagerie.
Panic surged through me as Stefan reached out. But as his fingers brushed my shoulder, there was a sudden loud bang. The door burst open, and Holly stood there, wide-eyed, looking between us.
Gabe? What's going on?
She asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't tell if it was the shock or sheer luck that had brought her here, but I didn't have time to question it. Holly, we have to leave, now! I said, grabbing her hand. Stefan's smile faded.
Holly,
he said softly, his voice dripping with false warmth.
You don't want to go with him. He doesn't understand our traditions. He doesn't see the beauty of this.
Holly looked between us, confused and scared. But I tightened my grip on her hand, pulling her toward the door. Trust me, Holly, we need to get out of here. For a moment, she hesitated, glancing back at Stefan, her eyes full of conflicted emotions. Then she turned, nodding, and we bolted out of the door together, racing down the hallway as Stefan's voice echoed behind us.
Run if you want,
he called out, his voice carrying an eerie calmness.
But remember, Winter Hollow always has room for one more Christmas tree.
We tore down the hallway, our footsteps echoing through the inn as we scrambled to find an exit. I could still hear Stefan's voice trailing after us, calm and confident, as if he already knew exactly how this was going to end. Every corner we turned, it felt like he was right behind us, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his moment. Holly's grip tightened around my hand as we raced through the labyrinthine halls.
Gabe,
she whispered, panic evident in her voice.
what was all that back there? What did he mean by traditions?
I didn't have the words. Or maybe I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. How could I explain what I'd seen? That our beloved prince was some kind of supernatural monster who turned our neighbors into trees? I assure you, Holly, you don't want to know, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. All that matters is getting you out of here. And away from him. We reached the end of the hallway, where a pair of tall, narrow doors lied out into the garden. Without hesitation, I threw them open, pulling Holly with me as we stumbled into the cold night air. The garden was dark and still, the snow-covered ground gleaming under the faint light from the stars. And then I saw them. More trees, pines, firs, and spruces, lined up along the path. But these were no ordinary trees. I could sense it now. The same shiver of wrongness I'd felt inside. There were faces trapped in the branches here too. Faces twisted in silent horror. With their eyes frozen open, looking out at the world with despair. I recognized even more of them. A couple of my old teachers, the mechanic who used to fix my car in high school, my old boss from the hardware store. My stomach turned. All this time, I thought these people had just moved away, disappeared for some normal reason. But now I knew. Stefan had taken them, and here they were, hidden in plain sight, part of this ghastly forest. Holly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth.
Gabe, what is this? Are those people?
Yeah, I said, my voice tight. I think so. Before I could say anything else, I heard footsteps crunching through the snow. We both turned, and there he was, walking toward us as if he had all the time in the world. Stefan's face was no longer charming or friendly. It was cold and calculated, like that part of a predator sizing up his prey.
Holly,
he said softly, his voice smooth and almost tender.
Come back inside. It's cold out here. You'll be so much warmer with me.
Holly looked at him, her expression wavering. For a moment, I thought she was going to turn back, that his spell still had its hold on her. But then she shook her head, taking a step back.
No, I don't know what you are, but I don't want any part of it.
Stefan's eyes flashed with something cruel.
You don't know what you're turning down, Holly,
he said.
I could give you everything you ever wanted. A life of beauty and elegance. And all I ask in return is your devotion.
That's a funny word for soul, I snapped, stepping between them. I don't think she's interested, Prince Charming. Stefan chuckled, the sound low and mocking.
Oh, Gabe,
he said, his gaze settling upon me.
You have such a limited view of things. You see danger where there is beauty, and fear where there is wonder. It's no surprise you're so alone.
I felt a prickle of anger, but I forced it down, grabbing Holly's hand. Let's go. We started to back away, moving carefully along the garden path, past the rows of trees and their motionless, horrified faces. Stefan followed us, his steps slow and unhurried. Then, all at once, the pines began to move. Their branches shifted, stretching toward us like skeletal hands. Roots twisted out of the ground, coiling and uncoiling in the snow. The trees closed in, trapping us between Stefan and his growing army.
Where will you run, Gabe?
Stefan's silky voice echoed.
There's nowhere left for you. Winter Hollow is now my kingdom. And in this realm, I decide who stays.
I glanced around, looking for any gap or way out, and found none. The trees had formed a tight perimeter around us and were steadily approaching. Holly clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my jacket as she looked up at me, terrified.
Gabe, what do we do?
She whispered. I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing, trying to think of anything, any way to escape. And then it hit me. The one thing that Stefan hadn't touched or twisted. The holiday decorations on the inn. The old lights, the garlands, the cheap plastic star on top of the tallest tree in the garden. Maybe he couldn't stand real, old-fashioned Christmas cheer. I glanced up at the star, squinting in the dim light. The only problem was, it was high. And to get to it, I'd have to get past Stefan. Do you trust me? I asked Holly, still watching Stefan as he circled us, his eyes glowing faintly green in the darkness. She hesitated, but then nodded, gripping my arm.
Yes.
Then run, I whispered, jerking my head toward the inn. Get to the top floor, find the lights, and turn them on. All of them.
What about you?
I'll keep him busy. Before she could argue, I gave her a push, watching as she stumbled toward the inn and broke into a run. Stefan's eyes narrowed as she watched her go, and he moved to follow, but I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Going somewhere? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Stefan's gaze flicked back to me, his lips curving into a smile.
You're very brave, Gabe,
he said.
Or very foolish. Either way, it's admirable.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I clenched my fists, standing my ground as he took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with something dark and ancient. Behind me, I heard the sound of a door slamming, and I prayed Holly had made it inside. If she could get those lights on, perhaps we had a chance. Stefan tilted his head, studying me.
What do you hope to accomplish here? He asked. You're one man, alone, against something beyond your comprehension.
Maybe, but at least I don't hide behind a make-believe title and a phony accent. For a moment, Stefan peered at me, his stare cold and predatory. Then, abruptly, he lunged, faster than I thought possible. And I barely had time to dodge as his hand shot out, clawed fingers slicing through the air where my head had been a second before. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing, but somehow managed to stay upright. Behind me, the lights in the inn began to flicker on, one by one, spilling golden light into the garden. I saw Stefan wince, his face contorting in a brief moment of discomfort. He hissed, backing away as still more lights came on.
Don't be silly! You think Christmas spirit will save you?
It's worth a shot, I said, breathing heavily. The lights blazed brighter, flooding the garden with a warm, inviting glow, and I could see Stefan's expression change. His eyes darkened, and his face twisted with rage as the lights grew stronger. The trees around us seemed to recoil as well, their branches pulling back as if scorched by the light. Holly appeared at one of the upper windows, waving frantically.
Gabe! The star! The one on top of the tree!
I looked up, spotting the plastic star perched atop the tallest tree. It was glowing now, flickering as the lights continued to blaze. I didn't know why, but I knew it was important. I glanced at Stefan, who was backing away, shielding his eyes from the light. This was it. If I could reach that star, maybe, just maybe, I could end this. Without hesitating, I broke into a run, darting past Stefan and toward the tree. I could hear him shouting furiously behind me, but I ignored him, reaching up toward the star. The closer I got, the brighter it shone, until it was nearly blinding. I grabbed it, feeling a strange surge of energy pulsing through it, and raised it high above my head. "Back off, Stefan!" I shouted. "I'm not going to ask you again!" For a split second, he hesitated, his eyes locked on the star in my hand, and in that moment, I saw something else in him, a flicker of fear. For a brief moment, I held that ridiculous plastic star high, hoping it was somehow more than just a cheesy holiday decoration. The light pouring from it was intense, casting Stefan's face in stark relief. His features warped, his charming mask slipping, this time for all to see, revealing something far more monstrous underneath. Eyes that burned an unnatural green, and skin that seemed too smooth and flawless, barely human. Stefan recoiled, his hands raised as if warding off an attack.
Put that down, Gabe!
He hissed harshly, with a tone resembling nails scraping glass.
You don't understand what you're dealing with!
Oh, I think I'm getting the picture, I said, gripping the star tighter as it pulsed with a supernatural warmth. I took another step forward, and Stefan took a shaky step back, his gaze darting between me and the star. This whole time, you've been feeding off people, trapping them in these trees, and for what?
Life, you ignorant fool!
Stefan sneered, though I could see the fear in his eyes.
Their lives bound to mine forever. A perfect, eternal celebration, undisturbed by time or decay. Immortality itself!
I glanced around, taking in the forest of trees with their horrifying, distorted faces. All those lives stolen for his own selfish gain. And he thought he could just keep going, keep adding to his collection. For a moment, I wondered how many times he'd done this, and how long he'd gotten away with it. How old he really was. But it didn't matter. Not tonight. Not anymore. I felt a surge of anger. I stepped toward him, brandishing the star like a weapon. Stefan tried to keep his composure, but I could see him twitching. His eyes darting to the star, grimacing every time the light hit his face. "Here's the thing, Stefan," I said. "You're nothing but a parasite, and you're not welcome here anymore!" Suddenly, Holly's voice echoed from above.
Gabe, watch out!
I barely had time to react. One of the trees, its branches twisted and gnarled, lashed out, its limbs whipping toward me with a speed that didn't belong in the plant world. I stumbled back, just barely dodging it, feeling the icy brush of needles against my face. Stefan's smile returned, mocking and indifferent.
You see, Gabe? They're loyal to me, and they don't appreciate you trying to ruin our gathering.
He raised his hand, and the trees around us came to life, their branches stretching and bending, reaching out like claws. Holly screamed from her spot by the window, but I couldn't look away. It was like some hideous nightmare. The trees seemed unstoppable, lurching toward me with murderous intent, their branches thrashing aggressively. But then I felt it, the pulse from the star, warming my hand, steadying me. I lifted it high, aiming it straight at Stefan. Again the light intensified, cutting through the garden like a beacon. The trees drew back, their branches shrinking, their faces writhing in agony. Stefan snarled, his mask slipping further, revealing eyes that gleamed with rage and desperation.
No!
He snarled, shielding himself as if the light was burning him.
You have no idea what you're doing!
Nah, I'm pretty sure I do. I shot back, stepping closer, keeping the star aimed at him. Party's over, Stefan. With an inhuman shriek that made my skin crawl, he sprang at me with impossible speed. I stumbled backward, just managing to swing the star between us, and the light flared again, brighter than ever. Stefan's scream echoed through the night as he staggered back, overwhelmed with hatred and frustration. He glanced around, his gaze falling on Holly, who was still watching from the window above. Wide-eyed and horrified. For a moment, his expression softened, his features flickering back to their charming facade.
Holly,
He pleaded.
please, you don't understand. I was only trying to create something timeless. A magnificent celebration. I wanted you to be a part of it.
Holly's face hardened, her expression shifting from fear to disgust.
I don't want anything to do with you.
She said, her voice shaking.
You're a monster.
At that, all semblance of Stefan's humanity vanished completely. His eyes flared green, his visage feral and otherworldly.
Unacceptable!
He spat, turning his attention back to me.
Neither of you is leaving here alive!
The trees resumed the pursuit of me and Holly, reaching for anything they could grab. The temperature plummeted, the very ground freezing beneath my feet. But the star pulsed in my hand, warm and bright, resisting the darkness. "Holly!" I shouted. "Get out of here! Run!" She hesitated, but then nodded. Backing away from the window, I saw her shadow disappear. And I prayed she'd find a way out, that she'd escape this nightmare. When he noticed his would-be queen had abandoned him, Stefan roared, a sound so primal and animalistic that it gave me pause.
You're ruining everything!
He hissed, advancing on me, his form blurring and shifting as if he couldn't hold onto his human persona any longer.
This was supposed to be a night of beauty, of eternal joy! And you're just a mortal! A worm wriggling through the dirt, sabotaging something you can't even begin to understand!
Yeah? Well, I said, raising the star higher, letting its light wash over him. Life isn't fair. This ain't a Hallmark movie, and not everyone gets to live happily ever after. He let out a snarl, lunging at me again, but this time I was ready. I swung the star forward, the light blazing, and it struck him square in the chest. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock and fury as the light burned through the darkness surrounding him.
No!
He shrieked, as if coming from 1,000 throats.
This isn't possible!
But the light only grew stronger, enveloping him, consuming him. The trees around us thrashed, their limbs snapping and cracking as if in pain. The faces within them writhing in agony. And then, one by one, the trees began to crumble. Their bark splintering, their branches falling away as the souls trapped within them were finally released. Stefan screamed, a horrible guttural sound that echoed through the garden as he was engulfed by the light. His form flickered, fading, until finally, he was gone. The star's light dimmed, fading back to a gentle glow. Reluctantly, I lowered it. The trees had returned to their ordinary, lifeless state. The faces within them nowhere to be seen. The garden was empty now, save for me and the lingering scent of pine. As if on cue, Holly reappeared, her face pale but determined, walking toward me.
Is it over?
She whispered. I nodded, still catching my breath. Yeah, I think it is. She looked around, taking in the piles of scattered branches and fallen pine needles.
All those people. Do you think they're free now?
I didn't have an answer, but I nodded, wishing it was true. I think so. I hope so. We stood there in silence for a moment, the faint glow of the star illuminating the garden. A well-deserved, peaceful calm settling over. The nightmare was finally over. But I knew Winter Hollow would never be the same. As we walked back toward the inn, Holly glanced at me, her expression thoughtful.
Gabe, thank you for saving me. For saving all of us.
I shrugged, offering her a weary smile. Just doing my civic duty. I said, trying to keep the mood light, even as the weight of what happened settled over me. Besides, someone has to keep that creep from turning our town into his own personal nature preserve. And then, to my surprise, Holly turned to me, her eyes brimming with emotion. And before I could process what was happening, she dropped down on one knee, looking up at me with a gaze so earnest it almost knocked the wind out of me.
Gabe,
She whispered, a hand on her heart.
you're so brave and handsome. I know we've both been through a lot, but I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've never been so sure of anything in my life. Will you marry me?
I nearly choked. For a moment, I was speechless. I blinked, looking down at her. Was she serious? I mean, sure. I'd just saved her life, defeated an immortal prince, and single-handedly liberated our Christmas-obsessed town, freeing the souls of dozens of innocent people. But marriage? I considered the fact that this absolutely gorgeous woman was on her knees, asking me to spend the rest of my life with her. And as I took in the sight, it occurred to me that I might never be in this position again. And as a red-blooded American man, I knew exactly what I had to do. I reached down, took her hands gently in mine, and met her gaze. Holly's eyes sparkled with anticipation. This was it, I realized. This perfect Hollywood moment. I couldn't believe it was happening. Some way, somehow, everything had led to this moment. No, I said. Absolutely not. Are you insane? Holly's jaw dropped, the gleam in her eyes replaced with utter shock.
What?
She stammered, blindsided. I reached into my pocket, feeling around for something, and pulled out a small card, then handed it to her. Here, take this. She blinked, staring at the card in her hand.
Oh,
She said, her voice hopeful.
is this your number so that I can call you later?
I laughed, shaking my head. No, Holly. It's not mine. It's my shrink's. I think we could all use some therapy. Holly's expression softened, and after a second, she let out a laugh, a genuine, relieved laugh that somehow made the entire night seem a little less terrifying. We both chuckled, standing there in the snow, the tension finally breaking as we realized just how absurd the whole thing had been.
Oh my god, I'm so embarrassed.
Holly said, shielding her face.
I can't believe I just proposed to you. I'm so sorry.
Don't worry about it, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Hey, what do you say we get out of the cold and get some hot chocolate?
That sounds amazing.
She chirped cheerfully, flashing me a smile and brushing a strand of hair from her face.
It's a date.
Quit it! You're ridiculous, you know that?
And you're a hero.
Holly replied.
And I'm buying.
And there you have it. Henry Hallmark's The Prince of Winter Hollow, performed by Mathew Farrugia and featuring Olivia Steele. Who knew Christmas trees could be so clingy? And that prince, he's certainly giving a new meaning to Christmas spirit. A big thank you to our authors tonight, Cassandra O'Sullivan Sachar and Henry Hallmark, as well as to our talented performers, Geoff Sturtevant, Kevin Barbare, Nick Goroff, Mathew Farrugia, and Olivia Steele for bringing these haunting holiday tales to life. Also, don't forget, we have our own book out. In this first of 3 volumes of Tales from Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, we've collected 30 tales never before available by some of the most prolific and talented authors of the online community, each one accompanied by a suitably grim illustration by David Romero. Strange cats, body mutilations, demonic apartments, revenge from beyond the grave, and yes, even a man-eating monster or two. All of these and more beckon you further into the darkness. Check it out today by visiting chillingbook.com or find it on Amazon. Just search for Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Well, friends, our weekly descent into the depths has just about come to a close. But before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us for tonight and remind you to take a moment to stop by Spotify and Apple Podcast profiles or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave Chilling Tales for Dark Nights a 5-star review and a kind word. And follow us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can find an archive of our work going back to 2012. And leave us a thumbs up and a comment to tell YouTube's algorithm you support us. And hit that bell notification to ensure you never miss a release. And finally, consider signing up as a patron at our website, chillingtalesfordarknights.com, to show your support and get all of our content ad-free. You'll find all of our podcasts there for just pennies per episode. I'm Steve Taylor, and it's been an honor to guide you through tonight's terrifying tales. Thanks for joining us tonight, and don't forget to join us every Wednesday and Monday for more harrowing performances, where we'll once again turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Until then, sweet dreams, listener. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.